Hello, everybody. Tim here with a special guest on my YouTube channel, Melissa Baisi. Melissa, did I say that right?
You did. That's my name.
All right. Melissa is a psychologist based out of Calgary, up in Canada. And she reached out to me because she has a background in attachment theory, which we're going to go over some. But she reached out to me specifically because she is into Neville. Most of the people watching or listening to this, are very familiar with Neville Goddard, and if anything, are over familiar with Neville. And as I often talk about, it seems like the quote unquote Neville community these days, which is vastly expanding, is kind of just repeating the same trite information over and over again. And that I can almost guarantee you is not what Melissa does with her background in therapy and psychology. So I was very excited to, get a chance to just chat with her. And thank you for joining us, Melissa. We're just going to dive right into it. We're, informal. So, Melissa, first of all, do you want to just explain a little bit about what you do, what your background is, and then we'll get into the Neville stuff?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist and I specialize in attachment-based therapy. So basically, when people come in, they are struggling with their relationships. Maybe they are too needy, or maybe they're cold and distant. It definitely takes different forms depending on your attachment style. And so we work through how to become your own secure base so that you can then go out and have a healthy relationship.
Got you. And attachment theory, I don't know, much about it. And I assume that most of our watchers probably do not either. Is a lot of this stuff, we would attribute to childhood, when you're very young, or childhood trauma, or even, stuff we don't remember because we're so young, we don't remember it, like when you're, a baby or 1, 2 years old, or am I incorrect in making that assumption?
It definitely starts when you're young. Attachment bonds are formed as early as 9 months old. So that the way that your primary caregiver is relating to you would be formed by around 9 months. So yeah, you're not going to remember a ton of it, but oftentimes primary caregivers don't change that much. And so we can look at our parents now and see how they're showing up to their life and get a good idea of how they were showing up to our childhoods.
Mm, mm.
Mhm.
So I'm sure most people are wondering, what is the connection with Neville? And I mean, if you want to talk about your experience of how you got into Neville first, before you do that, whatever you would like to share in regards to that.
Yeah, so it's interesting the connection that attachment theory has around Neville. So Neville would say things like, we don't need to be focused on our childhood in order to create the life that we want today. But our neural pathways get trained in such a way that it's really hard to break the way we show up attachment wise without doing some work on it, without regulating the nervous system, without learning how to become your own secure base. But a lot of Neville's work using your imagination, your book even around relaxation, that your book really actually focused all around regulating the nervous system. And so if we can regulate our nervous system, we can have a stronger attachment bond. And so it's a little bit of an indirect connection to Neville. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how indirect it sounds direct enough to me. I mean, I'm very interested. um you've seen me, and most of the people watching this know that I've criticized the kind of like SP, specific person obsession, that we see on YouTube and everywhere in regards to Neville's stuff. um I'm just curious about how you work with people in regards to what Neville is teaching, because it can be so valuable. But as you know, as we all both know, and most people watching this know, it also, if you just take it at face value, it's very easy to misinterpret and misapply it. So it actually is more almost hurtful than effective in changing your life.
How do you mean? Because I've had some clients say that, but I'm wondering if you're meaning the same thing as them.
Well, I think people take this idea that they are all imagination. They take it very literally, and then they go out and assume that they're gonna just, magically be able to attract people or get the success they want that they read about in these success stories relatively easily. And what ends up happening for most people is they go out and all this internal shit that's been there since they were kids, all of that,
Mm.
you can call it trauma, where whether it was major trauma or micro trauma, or all of this, stuff that we've had since we were little people, that's very ingrained in us, comes up. And why I
Yes.
emphasize relaxation is it's like you're saying, it's trying to relax your nervous system so you're actually able to tap into some of these imaginative qualities and powers, if you want to say that word, that Neville suggested we utilize. But I think, almost impossible to do that unless you have done inner work dealing with this resistance that's seemingly inevitably going to come up. So the SP stuff, especially, strikes me as just like totally unrealistic, because people haven't done the inner work to change who they are before they can naturally attract a good partner in their life.
Yeah.
Would you? Yeah.
I would agree with that. And I think that Neville's techniques are so powerful that even if you don't do the inner work, you can still attract back an SP using Neville's techniques, but you're not going to keep them
I
because,
agree. Exactly. Yes. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, just because that old patterning is there. And so what we naturally assume out of people is built when we're kids. It's built from our primary attachment figure. And so if our primary attachment figure is kind of sometimes there for us, but sometimes not there for us, then we're going to develop an attachment style that's anxious. And we're going to learn that we have to try harder and harder and harder to get their attention. And I think a lot of people in the SP community are anxious attachment styles. And so their primary caregiver was probably somebody who wasn't well attuned to what they needed as children. And so they have to get louder and louder to get heard. And it turns into a neediness and like a desperation, really. Which is why when we do that attachment-based work and we learn how to regulate our nervous systems through things like relaxation, like you talk about in your book, we can come back and have that relationship that we're looking for.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. I completely agree. So how did you, well, first of all, how did you find Neville?
So it was from being an attachment-based therapist and having so many people coming for generally the same thing, that they either want to be in a relationship or have been in a relationship that didn't work out and they're wanting that relationship back. And so just through my own research, going through the textbooks was one thing, but then finding Neville was it was a little, this subset community back
Oh
in
yeah.
like 2019. Is that around when it came on the scene? I found it around like 2019.
I honestly, I don't, some of the, people I'm friends with on the online community, like the Reddit pages, would know better, but it does seem like Neville took a turn for like this real, Neville became much more popular around that time, I would think. And the SP
Yeah.
thing seems to be the real, or if not the driving force, one of the main driving forces for that. So a client didn't bring this to you. It was something that you just discovered on your own.
Yeah.
Neville's, yeah,
YouTube, good old YouTube is how I found Neville.
sure.
Well, Abraham Hicks actually, well, actually, okay, so how it, yeah, it was around Abraham Hicks around 2015. And then that kind of morphed into people coming and wanting to talk about twin flame. And so the
Okay.
twin flame thing started getting momentum around 2017, 2018. And then I feel like the Neville steam picked up after the twin flame thing.
Got you. Got you. So you've always had clients who were kind of interested in these manifesting, law of attraction, I'm going to get my partner back type of ideas. I would say fringe ideas, but they're not fringe ideas anymore because they're, so prominent on social media, especially YouTube. You've always had clients that had that. We're trying to do that pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Um, so what do you, and I mean, I guess I should ask too. So, you have a background in psychology. When you started hearing about like the Abraham Hicks stuff, were you into the law of attraction like before that, or was this something that like, and like when you heard about Abraham Hicks or started to get into it, how much of that did you buy? Because like I can tell you, like my background is more in like Eastern mysticism and somewhat esoteric stuff, but it's grounded in like much more of like a, you live kind of a simple, like you do the dishes and you make sure what needs to be done is done. It's much more of like a Zen background than like some like, we're lighting candles in the air and saying mantras and manifesting things. So to this day, I'm very into the law of attraction and Neville and all this stuff, but to this day, there's a
Mhm.
lot of hesitation I have and a lot of skepticism I have towards all of it. Especially like these weird subsets like the SP subset. So I'm just curious about how you balance those two things, I guess, and what your own experiences are in terms of that.
Well, I remember the first time I heard Abraham Hicks, I was like, who's this psychologist? This is really good CBT, cognitive
Yeah,
behavioral
yeah,
therapy.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great take. Wow.
Yeah. And so then I looked and I was like, and I hadn't ever really heard of channeling before.
Sure.
So I was like, they're channeling a collective of beings. Like, what? I was like, well, whatever. It's amazing stuff. So I can let go of where it's coming from, because it was so on point. And then I started practicing using it in my own life and started noticing miracles happen. And I was just
Mm,
like, whoa, this stuff is powerful. So it didn't take much to get me to buy in, really. And it's been kind of a fine line in my practice. I'm always really careful because the one thing that can be problematic, especially if people are dealing with trauma, is they feel blamed by law of attraction. So I would certainly never tell like a rape victim that they create their own reality.
right.
Yeah, that wouldn't be the direction I would go in. It's really kind of me knowing what kind of client I've got in front of me before I can really kind of drop any law of attraction stuff on them.
Yeah, I love your response there. First of all, that you were open-minded enough to just see pretty much right away, listen, like I don't care what this lady or this entity is talking about, like there's some valuable information here. um
Mhm.
and then secondly, knowing that you have to pick and choose how you utilize this kind of information with clients and people. I think that both of those aspects of using this stuff are way underutilized. The longer I work with people on these principles and the longer I see that this community or these ideas expand, the more shocked I am with the lack of common sense and sometimes common decency, in terms of how people first of all digest this material, because a lot of people, a lot of psychologists, they're going to hear something like entity or whatever and they're just like, no, done, it's bullshit, there's no way, I'm done. And they don't recognize that they're, even if we disagree with a lot of what this person may be saying, if there's something good there, there's something good, there's something worth exploring. um so I really think that that's commendable that you just are able to were able to see that so easily. And then secondly, more importantly, is this idea that you can't, these ideas I don't think can be expressed, so you can't just dogmatically teach this stuff, especially to people who are in therapy and have gone through trauma, significant trauma. It's insane. But um you don't have therapists on Reddit talking to people when people who have gone through trauma ask about SPs or ask about how to recover from this serious traumatic event. Instead of having a therapist give them advice that makes some sense and is compassionate, you have people acting insane, and shaming the person, and it's awful. And it's why, I mean, I think, and this is something that all is relatively new to me, because I became more exposed to like the Reddit community this past year. I find like the Neville Reddit page toxic because of the dogmatism and the shaming.
Mhm.
And YouTube, unfortunately, if you engage in YouTube, the comments and people going back and forth, there's a lot of that too. Part of that's to be expected. It is social media, but I just do think for people watching and for people who are dealing with attachment issues or other life traumas, it's important to recognize that social media is not necessarily your friend when it comes to this stuff. There's a lot of good people sharing their stories, and there's some good advice being given there, but um, you're much better off going to somebody like Melissa if you want to actually deal with these issues than just listening to advice that we hear on these platforms. And I don't mean to rant about that so much. I just feel like it's kind of the dark underbelly, and I love that you are doing this in a therapeutic setting. I can still hardly believe it. So do you know any other therapists that and then we're going to talk about like what you do with clients if you want to, but do you know other therapists that are using Neville stuff, that are into attachment theory or other stuff, or this is it?
Yeah, and that's why I'm reaching out and wanting to make these connections. I'm actually branching off to become an attachment coach, because I feel like I'm going to have more freedom to talk about the things I really believe in as an attachment coach than as a psychologist.
Sure. I mean, as a coach, you can do whatever the heck you want. This is coming from a coach, yeah, that's probably true. But I mean, I do say your background in psychology really gives you a validity that is needed. I mean, my hope when I wrote Relax More, Try Less, my expectation as a human being was that, well, this is going to start, Neville stuff is so good that even if people don't believe a lot of it, it's going to start being studied by the mainstream and implemented by
Yeah.
mainstream psychologists and like you say scientists or whatever, behavioralists or whatever. And that really has not happened, and I'm shocked, kind of, honestly. I was surprised when I wrote that book back in 2015 that more people hadn't been talking about this stuff. I'm more surprised today because he's exponentially better known than he was 6 or 7 years ago. But it's still, there's like a total lack of people like yourself, with
Yeah.
a background in psychology and trauma, utilizing his stuff.
Yeah.
So
So he
that segue. So how do you use his stuff if when you have clients come in? I don't want to blab too much. I want you to get
that's
to
okay.
explain your
My program.
process. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I do that is different from like just SP coaches, because I'm happy to get somebody back together with their SP. I will always tell them though, if you don't do the inner work, you're not going to keep your SP. But hey, if you need to manifest them back just so you can see that the law works, do it. But here's like I definitely let them know what they can expect from just manifesting an SP, and that's a whole heck of a lot of, you're just going to get your SP. That's it. And they probably won't stick around. The same thing will probably unfold again. So what I like to do with clients is take them through their past. Let's dive into what kind of relationship did you have with your parents growing up? What kind of relationship did you have with yourself growing up? What kind of relationships did you have with peers growing up? Let's understand, let's get a big full picture of this person, because all of those earlier relationships are going to inform how people are assuming their relationships to be today. And as Neville says, it's our assumptions that are going to create our reality. So we need to change how we assume people are going to be showing up. And we can only change how we assume people are showing up by changing how we ourselves are showing up, because we have to be a brand new person to see people through a different lens. As Neville says, no one to change but self. So it's going in and doing all the psychological work first, going and doing that deeper stuff, giving them some tools to keep their nervous system regulated, to work with some of those sticky parts inside of them that are full of pain, full of trauma, knowing how to relate to those parts, knowing how to speak kindly, like you were talking about self-compassion in your book. So having a more compassionate stance to self, and then getting into scripting, affirming, imagining, SATs, all of the things that Neville has us doing. We can do all of that from a more healed place. And then the stuff that we manifest in is going to stick.
Mhm.
That's my approach.
Because your deeper self will have shifted, will have changed on a truly transformative level, as opposed to putting a band-aid over a gouging wound, that like it's actually a deeper shift. Can we just talk a little bit about I guess nervous system regulation, and
Yeah.
how you like to ground people? I'm always curious about different approaches with that, and how you prefer to do it with clients.
Well, I ground people probably similarly how you ground people. I notice that you have a very calming voice. And so you just kind of get into that calm state. I make sure that my nervous system is really regulated. And um, it's called interoceptive awareness. And interoceptive awareness is having the ability to feel into what you're feeling, but also feeling into what other people are feeling too. So nervous system regulation is contagious. So I'm going to ground people in session by keeping myself regulated. Outside of session, I have them do various types of exercises. But I do have a lot of my clients reading Neville, because I feel that you can ground your nervous system through really remembering these principles and remembering that it's our consciousness that's the only reality, and that's actual reality. And that can be very exciting, that all we have to do is conceive of things, and that's reality, not the stuff that we see on the outside. So Neville techniques, imagining, scripting, affirming, these are all ways that I'm going to ground somebody. But another really grounding thing I find for clients is psychoeducation around how the nervous system works, the different parts of the nervous system. And so when they're in an anxious state, having them be able to label that state, exactly where in their nervous system it's activated, or if they're in a depressed state, having them know exactly where their nervous system is activated in that state. So just that education, I find people being able to identify, like, oh, I'm in my sympathetic activation. So sympathetic is an anxious activation. Just knowing that gives them that momentary, it's called being in ventral. When you're in a regulated state, it gives them that momentary feeling of being in ventral, to just notice that they're in sympathetic. Does that make sense, or was that too nerdy?
No, 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 no. It did make sense, and I think people will follow it, and or if they don't, they'll follow it to the degree they needed to follow it, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you have a client that's open, obviously you're doing this work on trauma with them at the same time, but when then you expose them to Neville.
Mhm.
What are the responses that clients have? I mean, yeah, I mean, just, yeah, what are their responses? Because if you're not exposed to something like Neville before, especially if you haven't really ever delved deeply into the law of attraction, it's got to be, what are the reactions of your clients?
Yeah, it's a myriad of responses. There are some clients that are completely shut down to it. They think it's total ridiculousness and they don't want to go down that road. It's super unfortunate. But what I've realized from working with people for the past 8 years is that people are coming in their own level of consciousness. And I think there is something around, we've come into this life to learn a certain lesson or to learn a series of lessons. So we come in with a certain level of consciousness, and some people, I don't think their path is to be a conscious creator. Maybe not in this lifetime. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't want to maybe brand them like that, but some people just aren't, They do not feel it, they don't want it, and they don't like it. Other
Yeah.
people are blown away by it, amazed by it. I always get people, if they're a little bit open to it, I get them to start a manifestation journal, and I get them to write 5 just easy manifestations a day. So free cup of coffee, my friend wears that purple shirt that I like. It's not going to snow today, these types of things. So 5 a day, and then start looking back in the journal about 7 or 8 days later and start to see what's already come true.
Mm.
And that's enough to get anyone believing, because it works every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a way, that's like a nice, you could say, introductory step to get them into it. I guess one, like my follow-up question to that would be, like, I find Neville actually to be a rather difficult introduction to um, these ideas, because, he's so, I mean, his language is very evocative, very Shakespearean, but like he speaks about it in like a very far out way, um,
Yeah.
which alongside that, he has some amazing stories.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, like, are there people who get, like, clients you have, like longer term clients who get into it and then are eventually turned off of him, or are like, how do, so people, like,
Yeah.
how does it work with the SP? I'm just curious, like, how does it work? So like they get it, they realize like there's something to this. Like, I might not totally buy this, but there's something to this. And this guy is not full of shit. Like, he's clearly talking about something that is valid. Um, what happens then? You know what I mean? Like, cause for me, like, I hear what you're talking about, and what impresses me the most is the attachment work and the trauma work they've done. From there, I feel like um they can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
It's like the Neville stuff is almost like a added bonus, if they're now aware of these principles. Because, I mean, to be frank, like, I've, the last couple of years particularly, as much as I love Neville, I now, with clients, clients often find me through Neville because of my books. I try to divert them to other law of attraction teachers that are easier to digest and less dramatic. And, we all say a bunch of bullshit. Neville said a bunch of bullshit. Like, too many people, I think, try to put him on this high, stature above everybody else. So I'm just, all that stuff, you can unpack that however you want. I'm just curious as to how your experience with clients are, like, who, 2 months, 3 months, a year down the line, 2 years down the line, how they utilize this material.
Yeah. So usually people are pretty desperate when they come to me. So they want to
Right.
manifest, they want to manifest a pregnancy. They've been struggling with infertility. So they want to manifest big things. And so then I drop a bomb on them. I'm like, okay, so you're sure you want this? Yes, I'm sure. You want this really bad? Yeah. Are you willing to do anything? Yes, I'm willing to do anything. I'm like, okay, I have this book for you. You need to get it. It's very hard to read. It's littered with biblical stuff. So you might get triggered. Just disregard it if you want, or just see it for what it is. Neville's not trying to make you a Christian. He's just trying to say Christians have it all wrong. We are actually God, not the God outside of us, but we are actually that God. And he's just trying to say it he was speaking for his time. And so that was his foothold in, I think he was like traveling around the Bible Belt in the US. So I think he kind of needed to speak in that way too. So I just warned them, I'm like, this is a very hard read. It sometimes can take an hour to read a paragraph to let it really, really sink in. So heads up. And I just really warn them. I pump it up like it's going to be the hardest,
Good.
most
Yeah.
difficult thing ever.
Yeah. That explains a lot. That's a great way, I think, to do that. Yeah. So then what happens?
Yeah. And so they're like, you weren't lying about how hard of a read it was, but at least you warned me. So they're usually fine with that. And I tell them, like, just take your time. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to read this stuff, but you have to get this stuff. Now, I'm not super comfortable with sending them off to like Joseph Murphy or whoever, Abraham Hicks, or Florence Scotian, because I feel like Neville had the most pure, most, what's the word I'm looking for? He had the least amount of limiting beliefs. He still had a few limiting beliefs in there, but he had the least amount of limiting beliefs. He makes it sound like you can manifest anything. And I think other manifesting coaches will say, well, you can, but you have to make sure the other person's in agreement, or it's the highest good for all. And there's all these caveats with other manifesting teachers, whereas Neville's like, you want it, you can have it. And that's what I want my clients to learn, is if they want it, they can have it, no matter what it is. And morality is subjective.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of a hard time with that because, I mean, I feel if people are doing therapeutic work, hopefully they're realizing they're practicing the golden rule. But
Mhm.
I think, these other teachers are saying you can, Neville makes it very clear in a lot of places, if you want it, you can get it.
Yeah.
And you got to be careful, as you said, of what you want, because what you want can end up biting you in the butt, relatively easily. He made that very clear.
The reason I have a problem with putting any caveat on any manifestation is because it then takes away from the fact.
Sure, then you can do it.
Well, not just that you can do it, but that we are God and we are everything. So we are that person that we're trying to manifest. We are, and the thing is when I get into morality and rights and wrongs, the only thing I can't deal with people is like animal cruelty. Anything that has to do with that, that's my line. I can't, that's a no-go for me, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm seeing people across the spectrum, people who have hurt their kids, people who have been hurt by their parents, people who, and nobody really does this stuff on purpose. Nobody's really out there purposefully harming people. It's just they're hurt people. And so that's why I really struggle to judge anyone where they're at, what they want to manifest. I want everybody to know, like, you are God. Your entire reality is your own projection. You don't share realities with anybody else. And so when we put caveats on what you can manifest, then that means that we're sharing a reality with an external factor. And I don't believe that that's true.
So with your clients, getting back to the process, when you tell them that, and when they've begun to implement that, what are some, what are some results you see, and what, I'm sure you have some wild stories.
Oh my gosh.
What happens, some of the time?
People always get what they want. They get pregnant. They've been trying for years, trying to get pregnant. They get pregnant. They get their SPs back. They get their bosses showing up in different ways. They get different relationships with their parents, because that's oftentimes what people want to be manifesting too, is a new relationship with their primary caregiver. The list is endless. Like, they get everything off their manifestation list. Like, so-and-so did wear that shirt that I like. Just from the littlest things to the biggest things. It's never failed me. If somebody's not getting their manifestation, I can easily figure out why. This work, everybody should be doing it, because this could really help people next level stuff, for sure.
So most of these people, these clients, if they get these results, they stop seeing, like, they stop seeing you, and they're implementing this stuff on their own, or what, what kind of, do you stand?
Interesting phenomenon that I've found, but I actually attribute this to my own manifesting, and everyone is me pushed out, is I've had my ups and downs with how well I can integrate Neville's stuff. I think we've all had our ups and downs with how well we can manifest. And I've noticed when I'm not like manifesting on point, then various clients aren't manifesting on point. The other thing I've noticed is when clients have manifested a big thing like a pregnancy or a relationship or a marriage proposal or whatever, they lose their magic. They lose their ability to do it again, to recreate it. The first time around, they had so much faith and trust. And then the second time, third time around, they're like, why isn't it working like the first time?
Yep, exactly. I see that all the
Yeah.
time. Yeah, that was one of reason I asked that is I was curious. First of all, I mean, that's really key and amazing that you're getting so many great results with clients in terms of getting what they want. That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's just great. But long term, people who are in this, who get into this for years and years, I'm always curious to hear people's experiences, because things tend to, I want to use the word smooth out, but like, it's like, there are ups and downs, but your relationship with these ideas, I think, changes, I guess matures is a way to look at it. But often, like, people get
Mhm.
excited and are able to manifest one big thing, but I'm always curious, like, well, what happens then? Were they able to manifest the big thing after that, and then another big thing? Like, I feel like a lot of these teachings, Neville particularly, it's interpreted very sensationalistically, where it's like life's one big high, and that can be the case, I guess, for some people, but I've never really seen that. And I mean, the people who are higher up than just about anyone I've met are not like, none of them have ever said or told me, life's one big high. They're much more like, they're grounded. It comes back a lot to this being, having a regulated nervous system. And it's
Yeah.
like, then the things you want often, I find, tend to flow to you or come to you indirectly, and not in ways that you expected or even intended, consciously intended. They're just there. Um, I personally, I mean, just to be frank, I mean, I think most viewers of this know this. I don't see Neville as being any different than any of these other great law of attraction teachers. I just think his approach was he's fantastic. His approach is so phenomenal and so articulate. But
Mhm.
I mean, some of the ideas, like everybody, as you pushed out, all these different ideas, they're great. They get people excited, but a lot of it's about belief, I think, and just
Yeah.
having that belief.
Yeah.
And we don't really even begin to understand that yet. The science is still trying to catch up, and that's why I think it's so valuable that people like you are bringing psychology and therapy in with this, because it's so underappreciated.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you. I saw, I think, somewhere on your website. You're familiar with internal family systems, IFS? Have you done?
Yep.
I'm just curious if you've noticed, like, I've personally, because I have a hypnotherapist who's also just a great therapist, and I've done some IFS work with her, and I've done some of the basic principles and stuff with my own clients. I
Mhm.
find IFS amazing once you know about Neville and some of these like imaginary approaches, because like you're like, I know, like, my clients are so open to it because they're like, I'm imagining it, I'm all imagination anyway. So I'm just curious if you have, especially with attachment theory, just idea, like modalities like IFS, it seems like there's so much to play with once you recognize how much power your imagination has. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And I would say that IFS is the gold standard in trauma treatment. So I don't even really do attachment-based therapy without IFS. It's
Hmm.
so interwoven. It's so important. I was talking earlier about getting in touch with those parts of us and being compassionate towards them. That's IFS. And when all else fails, when you're at the lowest of lows and you can't pull yourself out of it, being told to regulate your nervous system, being told you have attachment issues, being told to read Neville, none of that works. What
Exactly.
works? Yeah. What works at the very like bottom of the barrel when you are at your lowest of lows is internal family systems.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do hope that more people, and it seems like it's that modality is spreading, and I know it's becoming much bigger in the therapeutic community. But yeah, for those of you listening, I mean, IFS is really a great complementary tool or primary tool to use alongside Neville's work and other, good law of attraction teachings, because it really works. It really works. That's great. Is there anything, we're going to link, obviously, Melissa, to your website, and I know you said you have a guide that you'd like to give to people watching. And is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll just tell you about the guide. So it's a guide talking about 6 signs that attachment trauma is ruining your relationships. And so I think a lot of people who are manifesting an SP can probably relate to that. And so if attachment trauma is what's getting in the way of manifesting the SP, then it is important to do some of that psychological work to clear the way to be able to accept Neville's teachings into your consciousness. Which is the book where he talks about the subconscious and the consciousness, and consciousness is the male, subconscious is the female, and how
Feeling is the secret, I think, might be.
is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so good. So we really have to get on board with working with our consciousness as well. And that's what psychology does, is helps us to remove the blocks, our conscious blocks, to enable us to open up to teachings such as Neville's.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that more psychologists are going to be open to this in the coming years? Or, I mean, are they going to have a choice? Like if there's people like yourself who are, have clients that are having all these relationship issues, and it seems, and there's clearly this method that Neville had that works pretty effectively for some people. I mean, do you see that happening? Do you see more psychologists, exploring Neville's work? Is similarly, I mean, IFS, I know it's a different thing, and Schwartz obviously has a background in psychotherapy, but IFS was ridiculed for years, and a lot of this somatic healing stuff was ridiculed for decades before it was taken seriously. Is Neville's stuff 10, 15 years from now going to be seen as, a customary tool in therapeutic settings? Do you think there's a chance that could happen?
I think that it will, but in order for psychologists to accept it, it has to be evidence-based. So that's
Yeah.
what happened for internal family systems just about 4 or 5 years ago. It became evidence-based, so psychologists were able to adopt it into their practice. But that's the other reason that I'm going more towards the coaching space, is because I want to work with people around faith-based modalities. And like you said, belief is the key. And that's what all of my clients have in common when they manifest their big thing. Of course, it's that they have the belief. So if we can somehow quantify and study faith and belief, then I'm sure that more therapists will embody it. But there is that tricky part of it that I don't think the therapists have to learn how to nuance with, and that is that it can be blaming and shaming.
Yeah.
So it's really got to be used delicately, and especially for trauma victims, that's not something you want to go in with. That's
Yeah, I was going to ask, because we have a little bit more time, and then we'll wrap up. Just how, like, when you have someone who has deep trauma, and you do feel like they would be open to these ideas, how slowly do you integrate them? Are you just trying to, use these, are you just trying to ground them through several sessions, or perhaps for the first couple months before you even, introduce Neville, or has this happened faster than that?
It depends on, so internal family systems talks about that we need to go at the pace of our most holdout parts. So that's the pace we're going at we're going at the pace of our slowest part, because we can't just drag parts. And for anyone who's listening, a part is basically a piece of consciousness that resides within us. So when we say, well, part of me wants to go here, but part of me wants to go there, that's what we're talking about. There is a part of me that actually wants to go do this thing, but I don't really have a lot of time, and I don't want to be late because part of me wants to actually go do that thing. So it's those conflicting parts that we all hold inside of us. So we have to be aware of our most holdout part and go at that pace. And so everybody's coming in, like I was saying earlier, at different spectrums on within conscious, like where they're at consciously, right? So some people will never, I mean, I've had clients for a really long time that they're just not ready for Neville. I don't know that they'll ever be ready for Neville. But then, yeah, go ahead.
But I was going to ask, but do you find that those same clients can benefit from IFS, and are you still able to do good work with them, I guess is my question. Like if they're still open.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just we just do the psychology stuff. We don't do any of the manifesting stuff. So if manifesting ever does become evidence-based, which I'm sure it's got to, because it works, it actually really works.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. It's really, I feel like the way that science is going now, it seems like they'll be able to do it. But, I mean, my favorite law of attraction teacher, Emile Coué, over 100 years ago, I mean, this guy literally helped heal tens of thousands of people. And, he's like the father of the placebo effect. And science doesn't even, they don't, I mean, scientists know who he is, but all this stuff about placebos and evidence-based stuff, blah, blah, blah. They've forgotten one of the great healers of modern times, so it will probably be slower, I would say, than we expect in some ways, because there is always that hold up where it's like, we need hard evidence. We have to see evidence. And sometimes with something like Neville, I mean, I don't know how exactly you do that, but hopefully the scientists will figure it out. I mean, that there'll be a way to monitor or something like that. I don't know.
Well, we are slowly getting there in some of our terminology now. Like when we talk about the nervous system, we talk about the state of the nervous system.
Right.
And Neville talks about states and how our state creates our reality. And in psychology, we say that too, that your state, where your nervous system is activated, that's going to create your reality. We also have a part of our brain. You've probably have you heard of the reticular activating system?
Yep.
Yeah, so that part of our brain is also filtering through, scanning our environment for what we know to be true, and only letting that in and disregarding all other stimuli. And so where we are vibrating, or where our state is, or where our consciousness is located, that's what is going to come through our filter. So
exactly. It's coming. Exactly. Hopefully sooner than later. All right, Melissa, thank you again. So what's the best website? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so attachmentrecovery.com, that's where you're going to get the guide. And if people are so inclined, they can book in a call with me and see if my program is a good fit for them. So again, it's attachmentrecovery.com.
Awesome. And we will put the link below in the description for sure. Thank you so much for being on with me today on this channel. This was a great interview. And I hope to stay in contact and continue doing what you're doing, because we need more therapists and coaches who are, have a background not only in Neville, but in actually trauma recovery. It's an important, I would almost say a missing link in a lot of the current discussion. So it's wonderful to see people like yourself doing it. Have a good one. I'm going to stop recording now, and we'll stay on for chat for another minute. Thank you everybody for listening and watching. Ciao.